call the regular meeting of the City Council July 20th to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Murphy.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Turco.
Here.
Councilmember Doby.
Here.
Councilmember Gross.
Here.
Councilmember Hasselbrink.
Here.
Wendy, do you want to say anything about the rules?
I can say it now, or oral communications.
Okay, whenever you like.
Okay. At this time, as listed on the agenda, we requested the public to submit their comments via email by 4 o'clock, and also for the request to speak. We did not receive any comments to date.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Doby will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right, Wendy put up a flag for us. So go on and look at the flag and Wendy's screen. Put your right hand over your heart. Oh, and Brother Gross has a flag for us as well. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Turco will lead the invocation.
Sure. On behalf of the City Council, our thoughts and prayers are with all of those affected by COVID-19. Can you hear me? I'm getting back. Whether it's being affected medically as an essential worker, by the loss of income, employment, just the loss of sense of normalcy, community, and camaraderie. We hope and pray for a return to normalcy before too soon, and for health, safety, and prosperity for our residents. We as a community and as a council are trying to make some tough decisions to help our community stay safe and retain and return that sense of community. Thank you as always to all of those in the community who volunteer their time, money, and efforts to help the less fortunate. Thank you also to the city staff and my colleagues on the City Council for working in the best interests of the community.
Thank you. So Wendy, there's no oral communications?
Let me just double check the email one more time. That's correct. There are no oral communications.
Okay, council announcement. This time, council members may also report on items not specifically described on the agenda that are of interest to the community. Provided no action or discussion is taken except to provide staff direction to report back or to place the item on a future agenda. We have a volunteer to go first. Find the best looking member go first.
Okay, that's me.
Okay.
I'm not going to be shy. Tanya was busy drinking. So I did attend the League of California Cities, the executive forum. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was all on Zoom. It was over 3 Thursdays. And then we got the pre-recorded classes on that. They did a little bit differently this time, and I thought it was very, very useful just consuming our time. They dealt a lot more with the psychological stuff of things we're going through and how to deal with people and how to deal with fact and different things like that, more so than what are we going to do about pension, which has been the normal, the top topics in government. And right now everything is COVID. So I thought they did a great job. For $200, I got 24 hours of sessions over the 3 weeks, and I'm going to see if I can. They archived all the videos, so I'm going to see if those are shareable based on topic and stuff. So I thought that was really good. I got a contact from General Alini last week, and it's public knowledge now, but the Pacific Air Show is canceled for this year. They just couldn't bring it together, but they've already committed to the date for 2021, and they've already had the commitment from the Blue Angels to do with that. So something to look forward to in a year and 2 months. So, and then also the 4th of July, I thought it just went outstanding. I heard nothing but positive things. Even afterwards, just walking down Farquhar and watching people sitting in their driveway and just being festive. It was great. Talking to General Alini, it didn't sound like there was anything major. And then even General Baldwin contacted me and said that was absolutely outstanding, way to take advantage of the military base. It got some good press coverage, and I know it was dicey a little bit and a lot of hesitation on, is this the right thing to do? But I think in hindsight, it was a good day overall. So I want to thank staff for just pulling off an absolute miracle and keeping everybody confined. And I think there were 2,300 cars. I could be wrong, but like I say, it just went off really, really well. So and with that, that's it.
Thank you. Dean, would you care to go next?
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor. On July the 10th, I attended the Orange County Emergency Medical Services Committee meeting via Zoom. This is a committee that I served on several terms back and was just recently reappointed to. Nothing significant from the standpoint of the meeting. It all went fairly quickly. I've continued to participate and listen in on the White House briefings. They were going to go to every 2 weeks, and that was announced last week, but because of the increase in cases countrywide, they'll be doing a briefing tomorrow, Wednesday, again with the COVID task force. So that'll be, I think, 2 or 3 of those now that I've attended since our last meeting. Other than phone calls from folks in the community, from businesses in the community, and kind of helping reassure them that life is continuing and things will stay normal. It's been relatively incident-free, event-free. So thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you. Tanya?
For the record, I am not muting myself. Maybe it's my computer. But I was on the Zoom with the Chamber of Commerce, their last meeting, and they had an HR consultant and HR attorney to kind of brief businesses on some of the nuanced things that we don't typically think about. And they provided excellent links for signage and different things for small businesses, things that you would need to properly function your business, and things that you might not think about unless you have like a full-time HR person right at your disposal. So that was really cool, because my background is HR, but I also know a lot of small businesses that are just scrambling to do everything that they can, but they want to be viable. So it was excellent information. I think they did an outstanding job, and their speakers were phenomenal. So it was wonderful. It was early. It's 8 o'clock. I mean, you don't have to go anywhere. 8 o'clock is a doozy, but it was worth it. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark?
I attended the budget meeting with Councilmember Hasselbrink and city staff, where we discussed the main issue that we're discussing tonight, item 11A, and the placement of a 1.5 cent sales tax measure on the ballot. 4th of July, I did not make it to the base, but I watched in my neighborhood along with, it seems like most of the neighborhood. And I was concerned before the event, but I'm happy that the event appears to have gone off well. Everybody seemed happy, no issues there. So thank you to city staff and the other council members for pressing forward and moving forward with the event. So I'll admit when I'm a little bit overly concerned, and that may have been one situation where I was. And other than that, just, like Councilmember Gross, talking to a lot of members of my community, particularly about fiscal sustainability. Part of it is me just gauging their reaction to it and their thoughts, and I'll share more of that as we're going through on item 11A tonight. Thank you.
Kind of a bittersweet one for me today, because I'm going to announce that I will not be running for re-election. I've loved the 8 years here, but met my wife at the same time that I got my office, and there's certain things we just can't do with the council calendar. And on my personal business side, becoming harder and harder to be a landlord in California, virtually impossible when the cities and states say the tenants don't have to pay their rent. So it's kind of the real reason you own apartments. So I will not be running. It appears we are going to have some candidates in District 1, but if anybody in District 2 or 3 wants to talk about what it takes to run, I'd be more than happy to meet with you. News got out I'm not running already. There's a few things I would like to get done, Chet, before I leave, and number one would be a resident's Bill of Rights as regard to construction. Having lived next to a construction site for 2 years, the residents should have a law with some teeth to protect them. And I also would like to revisit the question of red striping on Sausalito, where Sausalito Court intersects, and also a left turn lane where Sausalito gets into Los Alamitos Boulevard. So that's all for me. We'll go on to the warrants. Have a motion?
I'll move them.
A second.
Okay, a roll call vote, please.
Mayor Murphy,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Turco,
Aye.
Councilmember Doby,
Aye.
Councilmember Gross,
Aye.
Councilmember Hasselbrink.
Aye.
Okay, consent calendar. Probably a record short consent calendar today. All consent calendar items may be acted upon by one motion unless the council member requests separate action on a specific item. I will move the consent calendar. If I could have a second. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Murphy,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Turco,
Aye.
Councilmember Doby,
Aye.
Councilmember Gross,
Aye.
Councilmember Hasselbrink.
Aye.
Mayor, did you forget item 7?
Yeah, I've been talking to him so much today. I think it was one of those subconscious things. Yes, you're right. Chet, sorry about that.
I think I've told you all I was worried that sooner or later my phone calls to you would create an adverse reaction and that you wouldn't want to talk to me anymore. But actually, I have nothing to report.
Okay, that's good. That's a good precedent. We'll go on to item 10, the public hearing ordinance number 2020-03, state mandated elimination of large family daycare home regulations. Chet, is it you or Michael?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I can take this very quickly if the council would like, and then Michael can jump in and add when I inevitably miss something. But essentially, this is a change to our municipal code that would take into account the changes that were made under Senate Bill 234, which essentially removes the restrictions related to the operation of a family daycare within a residential zone. Prior to the enactment of this law, we were able to regulate what were deemed larger daycare facilities, ones that had up to 14 children. Now the designation of a small daycare has gone away, which was any daycare that was operating up to 8 children. So this effectively is an eroding of some of our local controls here at the local level with regards to how we regulate the single-family neighborhoods. And as I stated, it was enacted by the governor late last year.
Okay, anybody have any comments?
Nothing other than what I previously stated, which is just frustration at the inability of us to regulate what is essentially a business in our neighborhoods.
So, Chet, basically this is another state mandate that's being rammed down our throat, correct?
In so many words, sir, that is exactly it. It is an erosion of, I think, very clear controls that municipalities have put in place in order to safeguard against certain issues, such as parking, such as hours of operation, such as what exactly might be just the mode of operation for these larger daycares. The Planning Commission did express some concerns with regards to what exactly this would do to some of our residential neighborhoods. So yes, this is yet again a move by the state to further erode, essentially our municipal code.
Okay. Michael, do you want to read it?
Sure. Let's make sure I'm unmuted here. So before the City Council this evening for consideration is ordinance number 2020-03 entitled An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Los Alamitos, California, amending sections 17.08.020, 17.22.030, 17.28.140, 17.28.150, and 17.74.060 of the Los Alamitos Municipal Code concerning regulation of large family daycare homes.
Mayor, if I may.
Please.
This is a public hearing that was noticed in the paper. It was noticed as a live meeting before the further restrictions came down. We did set up a space in the community center for the public to attend the public hearing if they wished. We did not receive any written comments, and there's no one present right in the community center.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to move this forward, please?
I'll move it.
Second.
Second, thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Mayor Murphy,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Churko,
Aye.
Councilmember Doby,
Aye.
Councilmember Gross,
Aye.
Councilmember Hasselbrink.
Aye.
Item 11, discussion item 11A, placement of a 1 1/2 cent sales tax measure on the November 3rd, 2020 general election ballot for voter consideration. Chet?
Thank you, sir. Before I begin, and maybe just a quick overview, tonight's staff report, and which I know that you all know is quite lengthy, and we will try to keep the presentation to a little bit shorter than the actual staff report. But one thing that I did notice as we were going through the preparation of this of the staff report and the presentation was kind of a harking back to kind of the first time that we were, or maybe the last time we were all able to get together in a public space, which was when we all had an opportunity to sit down for the state of the city. And if I can ask Wendy to go ahead and start the slide presentation. And then go ahead and move to that second slide. So during the presentation, you all took an opportunity to speak about some different core tenets of the community. And the reason I'm bringing them up now is because I feel as though they get to the very heart of one of the things that we're going to be discussing tonight. Councilmember Doby, you took the time to talk about community and the different connections between neighbors and neighborhoods and how we, essentially this is a very special place. Councilman Gross, you took the opportunity to talk about our police department and the interaction between them and the community and how exactly those bonds are forged. Mayor Pro Tem Churko, you took the opportunity to speak about, fiscal responsibility and how exactly that ties into the larger fabric of what exactly Los Al is. And then Councilmember Hasselbrink, you spoke a lot about partnerships and the different agencies that we're able to pull together, the different nonprofits that we're able to call upon in order to really take advantage of some of the things that we have here in town. And then Mayor, you spoke about the vision for the city and where we're going and how exactly we were going to get there, and basically how all of those 4 other items really allowed us to have a vision for the future. Next slide, please. So I've been clear since my time here that I've always seen Los Alamitos as a city that punches well above its weight. Our partnerships and that vision has allowed us to really accomplish a lot of things that normal cities just cannot do. I think My first event, obviously, with the city was Race with the Base, which I was completely blown away with. The fact that we were able to successfully pull off the 4th of July in partnership with the base and in speaking with the general afterwards, I've never been prouder of a staff or just the way that the community reacted when asked to do things in a certain way. There really truly was a bond of what exactly makes La Salle La Salle. And that quality of life and that sense of community is not something that's very easily found. It's authentic, it's real, and it can't be manufactured. Next slide, please. That does take me to one of the key tenets of that report, which was fiscal responsibility, which then ties into sustainability. Obviously, the reason that this city is what it is because of the services that are provided and the community that we are. I think any community that has something that's as closely held as our quality of life looks for ways to ensure that it's going to survive for the long term. And those communities, when they realize that there is an issue, much like we have, they adopt a certain mantra, which I think this council has, which is, once understanding that there was an issue, finding out what it is, facing that issue, and then going about ways of finding a way to fix it. Next slide, please. I know that you all remember this slide. It was presented to you a number of different ways in a number of different fashions back in July and then again in December. And this council, after seeing these presentations, all agreed and bought into the idea that, there was an issue here that needed to be grappled with, that we needed to take ownership of. As you can see, it clearly shows that expenditures will outpace revenues. There's a lot of factors that go into that as to how exactly we arrived at this position. A lot of them not of our own making, situations that were handed down by the state with regards to changes in the way that the PERS rates are calculated, money that is taken by the state from local coffers in order to fill budget gaps. And then also, just economic issues of the true economy of how cities are run nowadays. All of these things have conspired to put us in a position where we essentially are looking at some very dire consequences unless we're able to take some significant action. Next slide, please. I don't want to use hyperbole, but the city is facing a financial crisis. As I said, expenditure obligations and commitments will exceed projected revenues. That was the case this year. It's been the case in years past, but we have seen just an exponential growth that the mayor alluded to, or Mark alluded to earlier, which with regards to the growth of that gap and our ability to continue to close it. I'm concerned, as I know you are, that along with additional cuts comes reduction in services and programs. And again, that gets to that overall quality of life that we all enjoy. And of course, one of the major tenets too is that while we are a small city, and I think an incredibly well-run city, we simply just do not have the reserves to simply write a check and hope that this issue will solve itself. Next slide, please. So now that we have found it, obviously the next step is facing it. And obviously that means going about the way of trying to figure out how to actually address this issue to ensure that we're providing that quality of life for our residents. Next slide, please. This council, I think, did this judiciously. They did not make knee-jerk reactions. They took the time to take a step back and study the issue, to really put the time in to understand what exactly the issue was at its core root. It's very easy to say, cut here, cut there. What isn't so easy is really examining the issue down to its very finite and understanding the root causes. I believe that this city council and the budget standing committee did a fantastic job in identifying what those issues were. and really trying to ensure that we were making sure that the public was involved in the situation and the discussion. And that's been one of the main tenets that that the City Council has, I think, ingrained in staff, is the ability to reach out to the community to make sure that we are touching base with our contacts to make sure that they know what is going on. Next slide, please. And so with coming out of a strategy, you obviously start to look at what exactly your priorities are. The city made it a main priority to ensure that we were continuing to provide a safe environment for our residents and for our businesses, and a goal of and a priority to address the structural deficit, and not just part of it, but all of it, to solve this issue once and for all so that we could put ourselves on a firm financial footing so that we'd be able to take advantage of certain situations as they come down the road in the future. Also, and I think this is very prudent and worth mentioning, is the idea that we would look towards what exactly our long-term capital improvement costs were going to be. I will remind the council that in the current budget, there is no money dedicated to CIP projects at this time. So obviously deferred maintenance becomes an issue when you begin to operate a city on a shoestring budget as we currently are. Next slide, please. So again, Budget Standing Committee did a comprehensive analysis looking at over 20 different options as to what exactly could be done. A number of those options have already been implemented. Some of them require voter approval. Some of them require consultation with outside agencies in order to approve. But the items that have been presented that are able to be accomplished have been taken under consideration and were prudent, have been implemented. Again, I'll note that this was done in consultation with the public, conducting a number of community outreach meetings and making sure that we were reaching out to everybody we could. Next slide, please. This took place in the form of, of our website, our activity guides, Facebook, and other social media. We received a significant amount of feedback with regards to service priorities and solutions. And I was impressed by the level of discourse in terms of what exactly some of the ideas that came up, how exactly they could be implemented, and just the general willingness on the part of our residents to engage in a discussion which is extremely complex when, everybody just wants to go about their daily business. So I'm thankful to the residents for that. Next slide, please. Some of the things that we did take away from those conversations and through our study was that these are situations that don't go away. Waiting for things to get better is not an option. You'll all recall that before the pandemic struck, that we had already hit a decline in the economy. We were already starting to feel the effects of that, and that the city had already started to make significant cuts and had already begun to outsourcing specific services when it was appropriate to do so. I'll recall again, or direct your attention again to the fact that we do not have large undesignated reserves to essentially tide us over for 5-6 years while potentially large-scale changes happen within the city. This is something that we will have to deal with in the immediate future. Next slide, please. I'd like to quickly just run through some of the steps that the council has already taken in order to fix it. Obviously, allowing the cuts in the revenue side. Next slide, please. The first is that this is not an issue that's new to the city council. Since 2009, since the recession, the city has cut 26 full-time staff. That equates to 27% reduction in the city's workforce. That is significant. There are not many cities out there that can reduce that number, still maintain the level of service that we've been able to maintain out in the city. The city has further reduced the healthcare benefits for employee cities, again, controlling future costs. Implemented a 2-tier retirement system with PEPRA, again, controlling what costs they can. related to the different retirement systems that are out there. Implemented a 3-tier salary schedule, again, ensuring that our new employees are, while valuable, that we are not holding over benefits from a time past when we could not afford it, or we thought we could afford it. All city employees are contributing to their retirement fully, and that is an important thing. And again, looking for opportunities to outsource and take advantage of private market when it is appropriate. Next slide, please. Again, like I said, cuts are never enough. We also have to be smart on the revenue side of the ledger. Working with HDL, we've done what we can in order to maximize our sales and property tax. We also have been proactive in our economic development efforts in order to attract new hotels and the Epson headquarters right next door. Again, these are efforts to try to grow our business sector and by extension, our sales tax base. As I said, I think during our last budget presentation, most of our city services are full recovery at this point. And then also we're looking for creative ways in order to use restricted funds that are out there in order to accomplish local goals that translate down to things that people see on the street every single day, such as SB1 funding for streets, also CDVG and other things of that nature that don't affect our general fund, but still can have an impact on our city. Next slide, please. Those cuts are coupled with the ones that you're most familiar with as we have just done them. As you recall, we started this budget process with the budget subcommittee with about a $1.4 million deficit. I'm happy to report that we were able to close that deficit, which is no small thing with a city of our size, but it did take a lot of work. And I thank the budget subcommittee and then eventually the council for allowing us to take this approach. A significant reorganization of putting people into new places and stretching them thinner than they've been stretched before. The cutting of 10 additional positions, including 4 within the police department, which constitutes a further 19% reduction in our full-time employees or equivalent. And this is an important one. Employees taking a 5% pay cut, excluding safety. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that excluding safety did not extend to its leadership. The chief, along with the captains, both are part of the group that did take that 5% pay cut, including myself. The employees realized the situation that the city is in, and I guess came to the table with thinking of how exactly can we play a role in helping the city continue to operate the way that it needs to. We're staggering hiring in order to take advantage of just as much savings as we can. Part-time reductions across the board. And again, this is a difficult one as this is one of the areas where we have the most interaction with our public through our classes, through our sports programs. Definitely our part-timers do a significant amount of work, and are sometimes the people that our residents have the most interaction with. So that is a particular blow to our ability to reach out to them. Again, and I mentioned this during the time of the budget adoption, these measures are not sustainable for the long term. I mentioned before that we have people that are wearing, 1, 2, 7, 8 hats at this point. We have acting directors that have stepped up and are fielding positions with very little staff underneath them. We have areas where we have entire organizations that are one person deep, which I'll tell you is nerve-wracking at its best, but adding in the added element of COVID-19 and the precautions that we're trying to take to keep everybody safe, it does make for a very fluid and somewhat jittery situation when you start to think about what exactly the responsibilities that we have on each one of these individuals are, because they are more than what they were 5 years ago, and they're definitely more than what they were just 6 months ago. Next slide, please. This is a slide that has been updated to take into account our ability to collectively close that $1.4 million gap in 2020, 2021. As you can see, while that is a good thing, again, we are right back in the position of having our expenditures grow and far outpacing our revenue as we move forward. The cuts that I just described, as I said, are not sustainable and will not close this budget gap. We would have to look for significant other actions in order to figure out a way to mitigate these losses. Next slide, please. Again, at the beginning, I spoke of urgency. As you can see from this slide, this is a picture of our reserves. As you can see, by the time we get to 2024, 2025, if we were to do nothing, we will have exhausted all of our reserves by the time that we get to during that fiscal year. And the structural deficit just continues to grow in the event that nothing is done. As such, we, as part of our discussions with the budget subcommittee and then also with the public, we talked about different options of further looking at different revenue measures that might be possible. Next slide, please. We broke these into different categories that we presented to the community. Obviously, there was varying levels of interest in each one. I'm actually going to start from the bottom, first being a parcel tax. It would have significant impact on our residents in order to enact something like this, in order to achieve the amount of money that we would be talking about. There would be over a $1,200 assessment that would be placed on each residence, which obviously is a significant impact to a household, especially in this time. The less impactful would be increases in utility user tax and bed hotel tax. The issue with these two items is that you would have to raise them significantly in order for them to be impactful. And again, getting back to the priorities that were set when we started looking at what exactly the outcomes or the solutions might be for our current structural deficit, they do not solve the problem. They, while would help, they do not close the budget gap to a place where it would be meaningful and we would still be faced with the situation of trying to look for other revenue options in order to try and find a way to close those gaps. The third and most viable is the one at the top, is a sales tax or a transactional use tax. This has the value of being paid for by both residents and non-residents alike. It is the least impactful to a household. And again, as I mentioned, would allow us to close the entire budget gap and allow us to start planning for the city's financial future. Next slide, please. It's important to note what is being asked of the council this evening. Any action taken by the mayor of city council tonight is not to decide whether to impose a tax. The council does not have the regulatory authority to do so. What the council can do is provide the voters an opportunity to decide for themselves as to whether or not they would accept further taxation in order to maintain the levels of service that are currently in place, as well as the quality of life that they currently enjoy. Next slide, please. With that, it bears kind of going through just briefly how exactly the sales tax works within California. California has a base rate of 7.25%. The state allows for local jurisdictions to boost that sales tax rate, but not to exceed an additional 2%. I know that we've all seen areas where it has exceeded 2%, namely LA County. Essentially, that is due to special legislative action that was taken at the state level. It is significantly, or I will say incredibly hard to get. Largely, you would have to have a county asking on behalf of the entire county to do such, or a significant lobbying effort at the state level in order to allow for someone to go above that 2% threshold. Back again to here locally, knowing that there is 2% out there, that is the amount that would be allowed to be increased by statute. OCTA did enact a 0.5 increase as part of the Measure N program, which raises our overall rate to 7.75. This effectively means that there is 1.5% left within this this ability to grow your tax base. If not enacted, other jurisdictions could supplement or could use that supplemental rate. And what that, if they were to enact those type of increases, it would seriously curtail LaSalle's ability to capture those funds in the future, which is in short by saying that there have been significant rumblings from different jurisdictions looking at ways to increase their revenues in the future. Obviously, the state is going through a significant budget issue right now, not only related to COVID-19, but also the slowdown in the economy. Historically, cities have bore the brunt of those decisions, be it through the demise of redevelopment, different marketing or accounting gimmicks, such as the triple flip, which allowed for the state to use different types of funds in order to backfill city sales tax. There is a significant worry that in the event that this is left untouched for a significant amount of time, that other agencies will step in and take this 1.5 that is available by statute at this point. Next slide, please. Just to give you a picture to hopefully illustrate some of the validity of those statements, is that if you are to look at some of the the vast majority of the surrounding cities, they have already taken action to increase their portion of the sales tax, taking advantage of some of the money that's available underneath that 2% gap. You'll notice that all of the cities in LA County are well north of 9% at this point. Cities within Orange County have taken action to enact different levels of increases over the past couple of years. Fullerton actually voted this past week to actually increase theirs by 1.25%. And I am aware of 2 other jurisdictions that are currently debating the validity of going to a 1.5 increase for this November election cycle. Next slide, please. Again, one of the takeaways, or a few of the takeaways that we had in talking to our residents about just communication and things that they were looking for locally. One was the idea that local control was important to them. Just as illustrated in the previous item with regards to in-home daycares, there has been a systematic erosion of local control. And there is a fear, I believe, and rightfully so, that that money that is captured by the state no longer has that local control. Enacting a measure here would allow for that local control, that it be used to address community needs, again, as dictated or as directed by the city council, that it would be vital to maintain the city's vital city services while creating fiscal sustainability. Also, that we all know that we have a significant number of visitors that move through our town on a daily basis, given our kind of nature as a transportation hub and our major arterials. The idea that the sales tax is something that impacts both residents and our visitors to our town. Also, that it's not a further tax on our homes or property. And that also, given the fact that there's local control, that there's community accountability and transparency. Next slide, please. I'd like to share just again some additional feedback that we did get from both our conversations with the public during community meetings and then also through the survey. Next slide, please. These are some of the major tenets which Adam from FM3 will be diving into a little bit in more detail in the coming slides. But one, obviously, maintaining our emergency response times, maintaining our community partnerships along with youth and senior programs, maintaining our our neighborhood patrols, ensuring our streets are in good repair, ensuring that our local storm drain system is working, protecting our anti-gang and anti-drug programs, and committing to creating more local jobs and maintaining businesses and attraction programs. With that, next slide, please. As you all know, we did do an updated survey using FM3. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Adam to go over some of the results of what those surveys revealed.
Thank you, Chet, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for having me here. I'm going to go through the results and then hopefully have an opportunity for conversation afterwards. So if you can go ahead and start on the next slide, please. So in terms of the methodology of how we did the survey, this was 323 completed survey interviews, all the respondents being residents of LaSalle who are considered likely to vote in November of 2020. So the survey was done in late May. We'll come back to that moment or that point in a few moments, but May 19th to the 28th. Survey was done both online and by phone, with invitations for the online survey distributed both by email and by text message. And for the phone interviews, a mix of cell phones and landlines. The survey was available in English and Spanish. Overall, the margin of error is plus or minus 5.7. Keep that in mind as well. And then where relevant, we've tracked some of the previous questions that we've asked in surveys in your city. Next slide, please. And you can go ahead to the next one as well. Starting with some of the general community attitudes, we like to ask this kind of big, broad question. Would you say that things in the city of Los Alamitos are generally headed in the right direction, or do you feel that things are off on the wrong track? And looking back from November / December of 2019, when we did the baseline survey, to the May 2020 survey, we found an actual slight improvement in the sense of the direction of the city. Back in the end of last year, it was 44% who said things were on the right direction and 26% who thought they were going off on the wrong track. The current survey, 53% right direction, so it's now reached a majority. Less than a quarter who say wrong track, about a quarter who weren't sure. And this is something we're seeing in a lot of communities, despite all that's been going on, right, over the last 6 months between the time of the two surveys, sense that people have a good feeling about their own local community and are trying to keep things moving in that direction. Next slide, please. While we see that right direction number increasing, we also see a fair amount of concern about the future of the local economy, both for the city overall and for small businesses. So we asked this question, two different questions. Do you think over the next year or so, the city of Los Al's economy will be getting better, getting worse, or staying about the same? And more folks said getting worse, 37% worse compared to 27% who thought things would be getting better, and another 31% who said things would be staying about the same. And again, this was late May. When we looked at it, specifically the condition of the local small business community in town, there was a greater level of concern. 45% thought things would be getting worse for local small businesses, 23% who said they'd be staying about the same, and 27% with rounding who thought that they'd be getting better. So almost 2 to 1 who are showing concern about the way things would be going for small businesses. Next slide, please. Now, at the same time, we also found that voters had generally positive views of the performance of city government. 59% rated the job that the Los Al city government's doing as either excellent or pretty good. Another 20% said only fair, which in many cases it means kind of average. And then 10% who said poor. So just 1 in 10 in that category, another 10% who weren't sure. So again, this kind of 2-to-1 ratio of people who had positive feelings about the way the city's doing its job compared to those who had somewhat less positive feelings. Next slide, please. Specifically, as it comes to the handling of the COVID-19 crisis, we still found positive ratings for the city's response here. 55% saying excellent or pretty good, although you can see the bulk of that is in that pretty good lighter blue bar. Still, 8-10% who say things are poor, and a larger percentage who said they were not sure. So potentially an opportunity for the city to make sure people are a little more aware of how it's been responding and trying to get a handle on this crisis locally. Next slide, please. Again, two questions here. On the top, we asked folks to tell us if over the course of around 6 months, the pandemic would be under control or would it not be under control? And there were basically a split here. 45% said not under control, 44% said it would be, 11% not sure. On the economy, however, a much starker division that's a little more reflective of what you saw on the earlier slides about the condition of the small business community in town. 65% of respondents thought that, in between 1 to 6 months, the economy will not have recovered locally. 24%, just about a quarter, who thought it would. 12% who were unsure. Next slide, please. So that's all context leading into the consideration of a potential local revenue ballot measure. So if you go to the next slide, this will be a description, a question about a conceptual level. Does the city have a need for additional funding or not? We find that it's very important in order for folks to have a sense that it's worth supporting any kind of measure, that they understand that agency needs additional funding. We find that about half of voters believe the city has a great or some need. It's a little bit higher than it was in the late 2019 survey. However, in terms of great need, it hasn't increased that much, and the little or no real numbers are about the same. And this is a trend of what we've been seeing, leading up to the around the time we did the survey in May, where, despite all the challenges that cities and school districts and others have been facing, voters haven't necessarily equated that to that agency needing more funding now, and something that, the city and others may need to continue to educate people on. Chet talked about some of the great work that's been done in terms of community outreach to explain kind of the situation that Los Al finds itself in, and that may be partially responsible for the increase in that great and some need number. But it seems like that's something that would need to be done on a more ongoing or continuous basis. Next slide. So here's the ballot question that we tested in the survey. And we find typically the best way to get a read on the viability of a ballot measure is to put together a hypothetical 75-word question and have folks in a survey respond to it. And, it's the kind of thing that people would see when they go and vote. Now, this is not to say this would be the only possible language. Obviously, the council, if you choose to put a measure on the ballot, ultimately have the final say on how this language looks. But one of the things that we were finding ourselves thinking about in mid-May when we did this survey is, we anticipated a high degree of concern about the pandemic and its impact on the local economy. And so we really tried to frame the title of this measure as reflective of that, calling it the Emergency Relief and Recovery Essential City Services Measure, and also talking about some items like public health, preparedness, and things like that. As you'll see in a moment, that seemed to maybe not ring true with local residents. If you go to the next slide, please. Here you can see the interest in this kind of measure back in late of 2019. Now, That was a 1 cent measure. The one that we tested in this survey was 1.5 cents. We'll deal with that in a moment. But whereas there was strong support for a measure that was a little more traditionally focused on the kinds of services that LaSalle provides, in the May survey, we saw a significant decrease in the level of support in this new version that's framed more as emergency relief and recovery. So a couple of things, and I'll just state for the record, this is a little bit of speculation. We don't know this for sure, but this is our looking at trends in other communities and in our assessment from your community. A few things going on. Number one, folks are concerned about the economy and concerned about how the measure is going to impact local businesses. You see that in the earlier slides that there's a high degree of concern there. The other thing is, I think that the language that we suggested testing in this survey rang hollow for a lot of people. And that's not what they're looking for, this kind of emergency relief recovery. They're not necessarily feeling like this is pandemic as much of a long-term concern. And so the measure doesn't really match the moment for a lot of folks. If you go to the next slide, I did want to talk about the rate, because that's obviously the other big change is that from a 1 cent rate to a 1.5 cent rate. Well, in this survey, we also assessed the viability of 1 cent. We asked people a measure with a 1.5 cent embedded in it. And then as a follow-up said, well, what if this was a 1 cent measure that generated $2.7 million annually? What we find is essentially no difference in the level of support at 1.5 versus 1 cent. Statistically, it's basically zero, from 47.47 to 46.44. And it's really just a couple people who are saying they're undecided. And so this says to us that the opinions on the measure are less about the rate and more about, do you understand that the city needs it? Does the services that are mentioned as hypothetical examples of how this funding could be used, do those line up to your own priorities? If you go to the next slide, this is the point that I was trying to make about the need for funding, which is this is comparing those voters who responded to the question about how does the city need additional funding with their opinion on this potential measure. On the left-hand side, you see the 54% of survey respondents who said the city has either a great or some need for additional funding, and they support the measure pretty strongly. 61% yes to 36% no, with only 3% who are undecided. In the middle, you see those folks who say there's just a little or no real need for funding, and they make up 31% of the respondents, and they more strongly oppose the measure. 2/3 of those respondents said that they would vote no, compared to only 29% who would vote yes. So at a conceptual level, this seems to be one of the key things that people are factoring into their decision-making about support for a sales tax measure. Now, the other thing that indicated some potential, kind of reasoning for why the measure has less support now than it did before. We looked at the right-hand side here, don't know. I'm not sure if the city has a need for additional funding. We often find those folks to be at least trending to be supportive because they generally want to help their community. In your case, those folks are generally trending to no on the outset, likely because, in the current economic condition, they're not sort of naturally predisposed as much to support this local measure and would require some information for them to realize why it's important and how the money is going to be accounted for and things like that. Next slide, please. So here's the indicator to us, at least partially, that the framing of this measure as kind of emergency relief and recovery probably was detrimental. On the left-hand side is those folks who said that we asked that the response to whether the pandemic would be under control within about 6 months or so. Those folks who said they thought it would be under control, the 44%, they're strongly voting no. 59% no compared to 35% yes. And it's almost the equal and opposite for those 45% of respondents who said it would not be under control, right? 61% yes, 35% no. So it seems to be another place where we find at least a correlation between some sort of underlying attitude and people's feelings about the measure. When it comes to the way the economy is looking, that's less of a direct impact in terms of opinions on the measure. While there's still a lean between the difference between those who think the economy will have recovered and those who don't. It's not nearly as strong as this question of whether the pandemic will be under control or not. Next slide, please. So in addition to testing directly a ballot measure, we also tried to identify some of the community priorities. And, if this measure were to move forward, what are the things that people care about the most? So if you go to the next slide, please. Here you see the question being posed to people is, are each of these things extremely important in dark blue, very important as being the next column over, somewhat in the lighter blue, not too important in red, don't know in gray. And then on the right-hand side, we've grouped together extremely or very important, the top two categories. We find that top priorities include 911 emergency response, which shows up in a couple of different answers here, worded a couple of different ways. Protecting businesses and jobs, and maintaining the city's long-term financial stability. Clearly, the various answers here show some pretty strong levels of prioritization, well above kind of that 47 vote that there was for the measure. There's a recognition that these are important services that are provided in the city, particularly the 911 response, which again, you can see the first item's 81% extremely or very important. The second item, ensuring proper medical and emergency response rate, 78%. The fourth item, maintaining locally controlled 911 emergency response services, is 74%. And then if you keep going down to the bottom, maintaining emergency communications is 72%. So each of these very, very high priorities. The next one, which again is asked in a couple different ways, it has to do with protecting local businesses and maintaining jobs. So the third item on this slide, which 75% of respondents said was extremely or very important. And then third from the bottom, retaining and attracting local businesses, statistically not much different, 73%. Again, another high priority that large percentages of voters think are very relevant. They want to be done in the community. And again, harkens back to kind of some of the things we saw earlier in terms of people's concerns about the local business community. In the middle, a couple of things that are more big picture. They're not individual services, but just maintaining essential services and maintaining the long-term financial stability of the city. Both of those came in at 74%. So from an overall perspective, voters responded to those statements. And then last on this slide, retaining and attracting qualified police officers, 71%. Another priority that voters identified, with pretty few who said these were not too important. I mean, most of these are 10% or lower who would say any of these things are not too important. Next slide, please. This is continuing the same question with a couple of additional items here. Other things related to public safety seem to show up on this slide. So maintaining police patrols of neighborhoods, parks, recreation areas, keeping public areas safe and clean, investigating and preventing property crimes, car thefts and burglaries, preparing with training for active shooter situations. All these statistically very similar, well over 65, in some cases up to 69%, extremely or very important. And what we're trying to do here is sort of figure out how are people thinking, and these are what they tell us are the priorities that they see for funding in the community. Lastly, on this slide would be the bottom item about city and community provided health services to prepare for medical emergencies. That's 64%. So not bad when it's focused on these kinds of health services, but notably lower than the items on the previous slide. Next slide, please. And then we tested a couple of the other public health emergencies, preparedness, like those that are circled here, and you see those falling lower than some of the items on the previous, or at least on the first slide, and sort of speaking to the fact that maybe some of those items were not as relevant when included in the ballot question. And then we see a number of other kind of community quality of life services, streets, youth and after school programs, anti-gang, anti-drug programs, all showing up on this slide, as well as senior services. Excuse me. Next slide. So up until now in the survey, we've just been kind of letting people tell us what they think. We did also provide information and let them kind of learn a little bit more about what the city's perspective is and why some of these issues are so important. So you can go to the next slide. Just to give you the highlights here of some of the more convincing themes about the measure. These are dark blue is very convincing, light blue is somewhat convincing. And the top one here by overall, although it's pretty much a wash, is the city ensuring that we're prepared for any public health or catastrophic emergency, and really referencing here the 911 emergency response times, which you saw listed at the top of the previous question. The one in the middle seems like a good sort of overall theme for this kind of measure, and that's talking about quality of life. The measure will help the city be able to continue to provide the high quality of life that Los Al residents enjoy. It's crucial for keeping safe and clean neighborhoods, police patrols, rapid response to 911 calls, streets, parks, property values, etc. 68% consider that to be either a very or somewhat convincing statement. And then lastly, accountability. It's important in every community. Everyone wants to make sure that funding that they're providing through taxes is watched. There's accountability, there's audit, there's public disclosure, and also, to one of Chet's earlier points, this money can't be taken by the county, can't be taken by the state. Money's going to stay here and be used locally. And that's about 2/3 of people who found that to be convincing. So we go to the next slide. And so we also provided statements from potential opponents, the usual things that get brought up in these kinds of situations, like taxes are too high and there'll be too much waste. And what we find is that a couple of things here, and just to explain how this slide comes together, the initial votes, what I showed you earlier, 47-47. Then you saw some of those themes, the highlights of some of those themes that were provided about the measure, and support rose to 53-42. So at that point, it's not far above the 50% threshold, but it does cross that threshold, and about 11-point spread from the yes to the no. Undecided is down at about 5%. But that opposition also has some impact. So as people hear some of the reasons why voters would oppose this kind of measure, basically falls down to essentially a dead heat, 48% yes to 46% no, with 6% who are undecided at the end of that whole exchange of information. And in both cases, I should say, we've tried to simulate what we think would happen. We don't know for sure what kind of communication will go out. Would there be an organized effort to either support or oppose this kind of measure, and how would this communication get out there? But it's helpful, we find, to at least understand kind of if there's this kind of exchange, where does that leave the level of support? Next slide. So in conclusion, you can go to the next one. We found that the city could move forward with a local revenue sales tax measure. There is some level of support. However, it's clearly not without risk to do so, as we find that with that exchange of information, the measure would basically be a dead heat. Now, compared to the previous survey, voters appear to be more sensitive to the impact of a sales tax, as I mentioned, and also not really as interested in some of the priorities cited in this ballot question, particularly that emergency relief recovery kind of framework. So the tax rate does not appear to be a driving factor. This, shift from 1 to 1.5. And if the city chooses to move forward, it's important to continue communicating with the public and stakeholders, including you've got a significant small business community and local nonprofit communities, and making sure that everybody understands what the city's needs are, and there's a sense that this is a community effort that everybody is on board with. And then one of the things that would be likely is that the ballot question itself that would be put before voters would be a little different than what's used in this survey, which could also have a beneficial impact in terms of people feeling like, okay, what the city is asking matches up with my perceptions and what I'm looking for. So I'm happy to open it up to questions from the council, or if you just want to discuss, you have any thoughts you want to add, I'm happy to respond.
And council, if also the option of if I can advance you a few more slides you'll be able to see kind of what the proposed title and ballot question is, which does take into account some of the, I think, the information that Adam was actually getting to with regards to how certain arguments did not, fare so well. Obviously, the idea that COVID was going to be one of the driving factors behind some of the information obviously didn't really hold water at the end of the day. And so I can advance you to that slide, or if you have questions for Adam now, that would be good as well. Okay. Well, not hearing any, I'm going to go ahead and advance through to the next couple of slides, and then obviously feel free to stop me at any time if there's questions for Adam or myself. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this is the proposed title and ballot question that we have put forward. It does take into account all of those tenets or those questions that did well within the last survey, while stripping out some of the items that did not. I think that you'll find that it's more in line with kind of those key tenets or those three main messages that Adam spoke about during his presentation. And I'll just real quickly, the City of Los Alamitos quality of life and 911 emergency response business and job protection measure to maintain 911 emergency response with local controls, protect local businesses, maintain local jobs, prevent property crime, maintain quality of life services by protecting neighborhoods, parks, peace patrols, street maintenance, youth and senior programs, and other essential services, protecting long-term fiscal sustainability. Shall the City of Los Alamitos measure establish a 1.5 sales tax, providing approximately $4.1 million annually, providing 1.4 annually until ended by the voters by adoption, requiring independent audits, public spending disclosures, ensuring all funds stay in Los Alamitos.
Hey, Chad, I just had one thing. I'll just throw it out there just to start the conversation with the title. I'm good for the quality of life. I'm good for the business job protection measure. The 911 emergency response, I'm a little concerned about because that encompasses police, fire, and all the 911. As you know, fire is already paid for with property taxes that we don't even see. I'd be more comfortable, because not everything is about 911. It's about the police presence. It's about being able to have a fully funded police force that you see police officers driving around. They have the ability for the community engagement and that type of thing, as opposed to just 911. I think I personally would like it a little bit more broader about the public safety, because it's very well known that most people move to Los Alamitos for two reasons. One's for the school district and one's because it's a safe place to live. And that's necessarily, I can guarantee 80% of our residents have never called 911, but that public safety is super important to them.
And I appreciate you starting the conversation, Shelley. I wonder if, and maybe Adam can answer this, I wonder if the reason that's in there is because the highest survey result of anything was the 911 response, at 74%, versus some of the public safety questions got slightly lower percentages. But I don't know, Adam, maybe you can address that, or Chet can address Shelley's question.
Well, I actually was going to defer to Adam on this one, but I will say that when going through all of the different polling data or the different questions that were asked, the 911 emergency appeared to be near, if not near the top. But Adam, please, if you can elaborate on that. Yeah,
no, you've got it right. I mean, that's essentially what we saw, is that voters told us that would be the item of most importance of all the things we tested in the survey. And I think that's probably why that featured so prominently in the title.
The only thing I'm concerned about is, and I've seen other cities, title these things, and it concerns me when we say save our police or save this or save this. And what we're gonna get asked this question. It's like, well, if this tax measure doesn't pass, does that mean we're not going to have 911 emergency response? Because I don't
eventually.
I mean, I just want to make sure that we're not using unsubstantiated scare tactics to say, well, if this doesn't pass, that 911 emergency response could go down. I'm really careful with words on this one.
Mm-hmm. And I guess Adam, and again, please feel free to elaborate more too, is that I do believe that 911, when looked at it as a whole, does encompass, I think you're exactly right. People do think about it in terms of fire, ambulance, everything that's related to anytime you pick up the phone and call 911. That being said, I think the predominant thought process leans towards police at the end of the day. I think it's just kind of it's a catch-all, I guess, in terms of where that goes. Adam and Michael, I will ask this question of the two of you. Is there, with regards to the title itself, I know that we're highly restricted with regards to the 75 words, and council, I'll admit there was about had to be 30 to 40 email chain going back and forth with regards to the wording on the actual ballot measure itself, which is highly restricted and incredibly difficult to get to. I am not as sure about the title itself. So, and Wendy, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so, well, I'll just jump in. I'm not the attorney, but our understanding from the registrar is that from a length standpoint, they have sort of a reasonableness test. We also, so that it can't just kind of go on and on and on. And then also we would want it to be a fair and fairly objective statement about the purpose of the measure, and not something that would be attempting to scare people or, clearly trying to get them to vote in a certain way. This is about providing reasonable information about what the purpose of the measure is.
All right, I just wanted to start the conversation as we're going to dig down into this, because I just don't want, people coming up and say, well, does that mean we're not going to have fire anymore? And trying to explain that, well, fire's funded from a different bucket and that's not really going to affect it, but it's only going to affect 911 for police. And well, how much is it going to affect 911 for police? Where we talk a lot about in the actual verbiage about, the protecting neighborhood park and police patrols and that type of thing, which I thought resonated more with residents. Obviously, I'm a little surprised by the 911 going higher than just overall general public safety and police programs. I'm not willing to die on this hill, but it's just at least for conversation as we get down into the weeds on this one.
Are you more comfortable, Shelley, with saying quality of life, public safety, emergency response, and job protection measure?
Yeah, I think it's the 911 that bothers me, honestly. And I know that went very high, but 911, captures medical, police, and fire. And in this measure, we're only trying to help the one out of the three entities, because the other two are already funded by our property taxes. So because there are going to be people that are going to pick this apart. And I just want to make sure that we have a defendable, even down to the title of it, that we can defend this and we're not trying to put in scare tactics and we get called out on it, because the credibility then starts going away. So I'm open to the experts, but I'm just, what residents are looking for. And I was just surprised that 911 came to the top of the list.
I think it's simple as, like me personally, when I think 911, I think police. And then secondary is, I know that the fire department shows up and I know that the EMTs show up. So I think it might be just a very simple understanding of when you dial 911. Most people think police.
Okay.
I kind of agree with Tanya, and I think the reason 911 is, at least from my perspective, critical. Again, I won't die on this hill either, so we're all being reasonable. But I just think when you think 911, you're thinking this is the most urgent circumstance in which you're going to need your city to respond. And it's true, most of us will never use 911, but that one time we do use it, we want a response as quickly as possible, especially if it's a safety issue. there's a criminal breaking into your house or something like that. And I just think that's probably the reason why it scored so high, is because people realize they're not going to use it, frequently or potentially at all. But if they do, it's critical in that emergency situation that they get a quick response.
Chet, could you explain to me how this tax increase is going to fulfill the business/job protection measure part of the bill?
Of course, sir. So obviously this is a general tax, so it's not dedicated to any one particular service. So even by listing all of these different measures, it's important to remember that this is money that will flow into the general fund. I envision, and I think it bore out by some of the testing that we saw with regards to how high business and job protection and growing small businesses actually rated, that as we move forward, we will need to focus some of our attention on economic development and how exactly we're going to promote our small businesses going forward. I think that there was obviously the concern about the economy that was clearly highlighted within the survey itself. We already are doing a small amount of this with the resources that we have today. In the event that first of all, the council were to vote to put it on the ballot and the voters were to approve it, part of what I would come back and propose to the city council would be dedicating some of that funding to a true economic development program, so that we can do what we can to support small businesses. But again, we're unable to make promises, guarantees. Really, the extent of what the council could do with regards to the funding would be to adopt a responsible spending pledge and designate certain areas of just hypothetical interests that they would be willing to explore. But again, that's we have to ensure that we do not fall on the side of this making a specific tax simply because it would trigger the need for a 2/3 approval as opposed to a 50% plus one.
Thank you. In looking at this, if I was writing it, my first sentence would be the same as the title. I would start out, to maintain the city of Los Alamitos' quality of life, including maintaining 911 emergency response, and list it that way. But just to jump into the 911 doesn't resonate with me.
I would agree with that. I mean, it's okay to put in the 911 emergency response, but let's not lead off with that. It's about the quality of life, and that includes this.
I concur.
Could we just add the word police? 911 police response?
I was just going to say that.
I love that, because look at you all contributing and stuff.
Thank you, Todd. I get to keep my 911 and Shelley gets to make it 100% accurate, which is important.
Yeah, I just don't want it to be misleading and somebody say, well, OCFA has nothing to do with this sales tax. It has nothing to do with the city, which it really doesn't. I already don't want to have loopholes that people can call us out on. I want to have this tight so we can talk about it, educate people of what reality really is.
So I will say I can see myself, Michael, and I can't see Wendy, but I bet she's doing the math as well. I know Adam is. If we were to add 911 police emergency response to the title and then add police to maintain 911 police emergency response within the question itself, I believe we need to lose one word.
I would get rid of the word and just say 911 police response.
Yeah, I think what they're suggesting, Chet, is removing the word emergency. So it says to maintain 911 police response, which keeps us with a perfectly balanced 75-word call to the question.
But going back to the mayor's suggestion that we include a reference to quality of life in the first sentence, is that going to push us over the limit then?
Yeah, my belief is we're balanced perfectly at 75 words here, which is the cap. The one thing I'd mention that may address the mayor's concern, however, is I believe the title of the measure itself does appear above the call to the question. So in some sense, you do have that context even before you begin reading the main body of the ballot measure language.
Well, and Michael, I think it also is just, if you just take, in the verbiage, the third line, maintain quality of life services by, and then put that at you lead that off by maintaining 911 police response, so just move that to the beginning of the sentence. Then you're not adding or subtracting, you're just reorganizing the words.
I think I may be misunderstanding here, but the title of the ordinance, as it reads here, City of Los Alamitos, quality of life, 911, emergency response, so on and so forth. That title, my understanding is that does not count towards the 75 word cap. So when we're talking about the 75, word number 1 is to, with to maintain 911 emergency response. So if we tag anything else into the main body of the question at this point, we need to run that calculus of what else are we pulling out to make sure we have that numerically.
Right, that's what I'm saying on that third line. Take that maintain quality of life services by, move that to the beginning, capitalize the M, by maintaining.
I see, I'm sorry.
So it's not, I'm not adding any words, I'm just shifting the sentence organization.
So maintain quality of life services by maintaining 911 police response with local control. And then we would continue reading through until we get to a semicolon that would then say protecting neighborhood/park police patrols, street maintenance, and so forth through the remainder.
Yeah, Richard, is that what you had in mind?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize for the confusion. I'm tracking you now.
No worries.
I think that actually saves us a word at the end of the day. So
wonderful.
Oh, we'll find another word.
Just to clarify, Council, for the title as well, did you want it to say 911 police response versus the 911 emergency response?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so.
Because that tightens up that we're talking specifically about police, so nobody can say, well, why are you trying to sell us on fire authority that's already paid for?
Why leave 911 in as opposed to just saying emergency police response?
Because I think the 911 is what tracked so high.
They both did. I personally think 911. You're calling 911 if there's something life-threatening going on. I think that's the reason it scored so high. Everybody says everything's an emergency, right? I mean, my kids tell me it's an emergency when they can't turn on the Netflix. But
That's valid.
well, it is. But they're not calling 911. They know they're not calling 911 unless there's a true emergency.
Right. I'm good with the 911 as long as it's police and not just general emergency.
Dean, I kind of agree with you, but I think since it polls so high, we should leave it in there.
Council, if I may, I'll just read through the revised title with the first couple of lines to make sure that we're all clear on what's being changed. City of Los Alamitos Quality of Life 911 Police Response Business/Job Protection Measure. And it will start with to maintain quality of life services by maintaining 911 police response with local control, protect local businesses, maintain local jobs, prevent property crime, protect neighborhood park police patrols, street maintenance, and then it will continue on. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sounds good.
You're using maintaining twice. I think what Shelley had said was saying by including.
Yeah, I mean, you can wordsmith it. That's fine. I think our main goal was to just change the emphasis at the beginning of the measure.
Okay.
Well, the intent was to put quality of life in the first impact, if you will, the first impact statement. So
we can modify to say maintain quality of life services by ensuring 911 police response with local control. And continue on.
that's fine.
Actually, I have two questions. One is, you know, when you're reading from the title to the main 75 words, does it have to flow? So right now it says City of Los Alamitos Quality of Life 911 Emergency Response Business Job Protection Measure, period. And then it continues to maintain. If you put down if you change it and revise to maintain a quality of life, there's kind of like a break in there. Is that okay to keep that break, or does the title and the 75-word paragraph have to flow? Basically using the word to start the two.
They do not have to flow. They're two separate.
Okay. And my second question here is, we're having a kind of a debate from 911 emergency response to 911 police response. Could you put in the title one word that says like 911 emergency response, but then in the 75-word paragraph, you could change to 911 police response?
You could.
Ron, didn't we already change the police response in the title?
Correct, but I was just you mentioned, Mayor, that you're a little hesitant to change it because of the fact that maintain 911 emergency response was the highest rated in the survey.
Yeah, 911 police and emergency response to me are almost the same thing.
Okay.
Whatever reads better is fine with me.
Okay.
I just think Shelley brought up a good point. When you put 911 emergency response by itself, then people are going to say, wait a second, that's the fire department. That's separate.
All right. Okay. Thank you for clarification.
So just because I want to make sure, Wendy, does it look like we have a 75-word question?
And I'll double check the words as you continue with the presentation. I'll let you know if there's any issues.
Okay. Council, if that's okay, I can continue, and then we can, once we clarify everything, we can obviously come back to this just to make sure that we've got it all dialed in the way that you would like it.
Sounds good.
Is that appropriate?
Are you going to be able to show us the changes?
I believe what we can do is, Wendy, if you can put it on, I don't know if you can create an extra slide at the end that has a completed.
I'll be able to. I'll type it up in the resolution and share screen with the resolution.
We can't edit this slide?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't quite catch that.
We can't edit slide 51?
Yes. Well, I'll edit it as Chet continues, and then before we finish, we'll show it.
Thank you.
And I promise I only got a few more slides. So. Again, just wanted to remind everybody that this is, again, not a vote for the measure. This is a vote to place it before the voters. Obviously, a big piece of this will be accountability and transparency. Sorry, Wendy, I'll need you to advance the slides. I just forgot that you're in control of all that. And one more, please. And one more. So along with this, we would, as part of our literature, we will be putting out that we'd be doing semi-annual reports to accountability, to show the accountability, include specific information about the mid-year financial update, information tracking the annual budget process. As I mentioned to the City Council when we were going through the budget process, this will be an ongoing budget process here. We are not going to stop doing the budget. So Craig and I will be back in front of you and probably after we get our next round of sales tax numbers in order to provide you an update as to how exactly we're trending. As I see that trend continuing for the foreseeable future, we won't have any problem meeting that accountability standard. Also, annual reports to the City Council. Obviously, we do a budget report, and then we also do a CAFR report. So we won't have any issues, again, making sure that we're being transparent. And then obviously posting those on our website, which we do as a matter of course.
Jeff, before we move on.
Yes, sir.
Are we going to regret saying semi-annual report? Isn't annual enough?
We can do an annual report, sir. I do not have a problem one way or the other.
I mean, they're not going to be knocking down the bookstore doors to read this, I don't think. But
Chet, do you recommend, I know some other cities have set up actual transparency or accountability councils specifically to monitor the sales tax spending and everything. Do you recommend something like that?
And I have had some experience with this. The issue with an oversight board or committee is that while they're able to look at how the money was spent at the end of the day, they don't have a budgetary discretion. That's a power that's reserved specifically for the City Council. And given the fact that the City Council already has a budget subcommittee, I feel that the role, at least in this jurisdiction, might be redundant. And the other issue that has been prevalent with some of these oversight boards is that there's very little for them to do, I guess, at the end of the day, simply because they don't have that authority to actually make budget recommendations to the City Council, because you already have a body that serves that purpose. I've run into instances where we've had meetings where groups will sit around and wonder why they're there. And obviously I'd rather not create work for a committee who's, just wants to volunteer and come in, do good work. I'd rather get them off to doing something else. But again,
and I get that. I just want to make sure that we're looking as transparent, and it's just not, oh, well, we're going to be getting all the money and we're going to decide how it's spent, and nobody gets to bless it afterwards or say, yeah, they're spending it exactly how we wanted them to in our vote. It's more of a perception thing, and if you don't think it's necessary, obviously it's not mandated, but just to make sure that we're looking as transparent as possible, and it's just not, we've got millions of dollars in the coffers and now we're just going to go get it if everybody raises.
If the council was interested in putting one in place, I would, ask that we clearly define what the mission is of the oversight committee. And again, I'll allow Adam and Michael to chime in simply because they've experienced this in other places, is if we can define their role as to reviewing the CAFR at the end of the day. So not the budget process, because again, I think that that's the purview of the Budget Standing Committee and then also the City Council to approve. But if an additional set of eyes were going to be put on the CAFR at the end of the day, after they've been independently audited, they can get a report that says, or they can get a review of the CAFR where they say, yes, all the money is accounted for. No, there are no management notes. No, there are no irregularities here. And then be able to pass not a recommendation along to the council, but at least to be able to say that this has been further reviewed by this committee. That I think would be an appropriate use of their time, and might be beneficial to kind of your point of having ensuring there's somebody watching the watchers.
Yeah. No, I'll leave it to the experts, but I just know a lot of cities do that. I haven't really dug more into it, but we're going to be spending on quality of life and police services, I want to make sure that we can go back and say, okay, here's the extra money we got, and here's how it was spent, type thing.
Right.
Shelley, would it be council members on the committee, or would it just be members of the public?
I've seen it arranged various ways. I mean, I've seen where there's one council member on there or two council members, and then head of, the planning commission and the traffic commission, and, people that are already involved. I've seen it where they've done these huge committees of anybody that wants to be on the accountability commission, they can be, and it's full of people that aren't even sure how to look at the numbers. And I don't know if it's something we need to decide right now, but it's just something I'd like to hear from the experts, how other cities have done it. Is it even worth it? Or does the public even care? Once it passes, they don't care. I don't know.
And to your point, Councilwoman, I don't think that it's something that needs to be established right now. If it's something that the council is interested in establishing at any time, that you do have that power. And at that point, you could decide what exactly you want the makeup of that committee to be. Again, there's a number of things to keep in mind when forming a new committee. One would be, obviously, it's subject to Brown Act, which means that there is a meeting, a taking of minutes, usually a dedicated staff person to that group. If there's a way to term it in such a way that it's a task force that's advisory to either to staff or some other way of formulating it that would allow us to accomplish it without some of the constraints that go along with some of the other committee structures. Obviously, that's something that the council can consider.
Yeah, I just want to make sure as we start talking to our neighbors and our residents and even businesses, and they ask the question, well, who's going to be watching the hen house? We've got a solid answer of saying, well, us. I just want to make sure that we've got answers for all the different things that might come up.
With that, if Wendy, if I can get you.
Sorry, Chet, I was trying to jump in real quick if I could. I realized I was speaking with a muted microphone for a moment there. The only thing I would add, I would share with Chet's observations that a separate body perhaps could be a redundancy based on the city's longstanding practice of having the budget standing committee, and given that the city's budget process essentially opens the books and provides information to the public and opportunities to participate in that process that will make it clear to the electorate where those funds are being spent and allocated. With that said, however, if the council does desire to incorporate the requirement of some form of oversight body into the current ordinance, we would need to modify that ordinance and bring it back for introduction at a subsequent meeting, because that would be a substantial or significant change to the ordinance as advanced this evening. On the other hand, if the council is to move forward, as Chet has mentioned, there are other means perhaps in the future of appointing bodies with some sort of responsibility for reviewing the audits and so forth, that the council can always look to in the future if it becomes something that's desired by the council at a future date.
Okay, and I'm good with that option. I think it's more for the five of us that as we are starting to talk to people and this question comes up, that we bring it back to make sure that we've got an answer for it. It's nothing I don't think we need to deal with now, but just kind of keep our ears open.
Okay. Wendy, I think we're looking at the revised language.
That is correct. This is the revised language, and it puts us at exactly 75 words.
Nice.
Okay.
I like it.
Okay. So,
Chet, just the grammar is not always the most important part here, but I think most of the verbs are sort of maintain, protect, maintain, prevent, and then before neighborhood park police patrols it says protecting. which may read okay, but I think it might just be better to make that protect.
I'm sorry, I'm reading it again.
Do we want to start off maybe the first sentence instead of to maintain quality of life is to ensure quality of life? Because then we can, how we do that is we maintain, we protect.
That's a better word.
To change this one to ensure. And then what about this? Change this one to maintain?
By, we just use so many maintain.
I think you said before was including.
Yeah, that's right.
By including 911.
I can't resist my inner need to call on synonyms and think of other potential language. And I would say that preserving may be another option that could be utilized either there or elsewhere in the paragraph.
I like that, 911.
I would echo that sentiment just from a action word standpoint.
A question about 5 lines down on the left side, we say police patrol. Okay, so that actually goes back to including and then blah, blah, blah. I got it now. Never mind.
We've got a couple of prevents, we've got 3 protects.
And again, Council, I know that we have a number of similar words in this. One of the reasons for that is because they are again, going back to the actual question that was pulled in the first place. We know specifically how certain words tested, and so I would encourage keeping as many of the words as you can or that you're comfortable with, so that they matched with the words that have been pulled.
Yeah, no, I think that this is good.
Go ahead.
I like it.
I think it's good now. I think with the change of police and all that, we've hit the things we needed to get.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, just a few more slides for you. Next slide, please. And next step. So obviously, as Adam mentioned, one of the key components of this will be continuing to do outreach in many different forums in many different ways in order to ensure that we are hitting as many different segments of the community as we possibly can. I have been working with an outreach company in order to ensure that we are doing everything that we can and preparing ourselves for what exactly an information campaign will look like. And that is it's an important distinction. Obviously, the city and staff will be putting forward factual information that can be found within the 12-page staff report, the CAFR, the city budget, those kind of elements in order to ensure that the electorate is informed about the issues here. Obviously, city staff with city resources are unable to advocate one way or the other. But what we can do is, again, ensure that the electorate has all the information they need and access to all the information that they need in order to make an informed decision come November. Next slide, please. These are obviously not finalized at all, but there will be a number of different elements that we put out. A lot of them will answer simple questions, like what 1.5 cents does for your city. There will be, based on the changes that council has made tonight, there'll be a heavy leaning towards ensuring that we're talking about quality of life and those type of elements and accountability with regards to the measure. It will also touch on services that the city provides and how those services are paid for. Next slide, please.
Hey, Chet, can I be really picky for a minute?
Of course. Please go back.
On the pennies, can we change the date to 2020?
Sure, that's not a problem. And again, these are the ones that you're seeing right now. Those are complete mock-ups. They probably will bear very little resemblance. Well, the general themes will be the same, but we will be changing a lot of the wording on all of these.
Okay.
Wait, is that one going to be like a postcard where the 1.5% is on the front and the other part is on the back, or are these all flyers? Because that'd be a really cool postcard.
So we have a series of different postcards and just flyer type mailers that we will be going out as well, or in conjunction with each other. The reason for it is largely that given COVID-19, given where we're at with regards with our ability to hold community meetings, we want to make sure that we're not losing any time. And so we will be heavy on collateral going out to our residents and out to our voters here in the near future. Obviously, we don't want to inundate them with too much, but at the same time, people tend to be interested when they receive something directly from the city that has easy to digest messages on it and that are, obviously visually stimulating. The infographics tend to be particularly useful. So yes, I know that's a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Obviously, there will be a number of different things, and what I have in front of you is just some of the pieces that we will be doing. Obviously, immediately following, if the council decides to push forward with this measure, doing a press release and beginning kind of a print media tour and interviews before we've spoken to a number of the outlets about their interest in doing stories about this particular issue. We will be developing dedicated web space for the fiscal sustainability plan and our long-term financial plans, which obviously we will look to get up and running very quickly so that we have a landing page to push people to once they are looking for more and more information. The information pieces, which you just saw, which will be sent to residents, and both will be, we will be using mailers and postcards, but then also our traditional quarterly newsletters and other items that we have available to ourselves in order to push the message out. Providing information at city events, those events that we're allowed to have, and then also looking for nonprofits that are willing to display our messaging as well and getting those out there as well. It is my hope that we will be able to resume community meetings. I believe that we will, given our ability to social distance properly. And I just think that that's a good thing to do. And then as we get closer and closer to the election, a reminder to vote campaign. Obviously, this is the first year that we're going to districts. There's a lot of changes within our city. We want to make sure that voters know that even though maybe their district is not up, that there is something on the ballot that concerns them. So ensuring that we're making good efforts to inform people that, hey, there's things on the ballot that impact you here locally, and making sure that we're able to get as many people as we can to come out and vote. And largely this is because obviously ballot measures are all the way at the end of your voting pamphlet, and we just want to make sure that nobody forgets to go all the way at the back and actually answer this question.
And Chad, I think because this is our first election with districts, I think a lot of people either have forgotten or don't know or don't understand what district they're in, so I'm not sure if that's going to be a big deal. The other thing, are we also going to ask businesses to get involved and support this as well?
So I will put it this way. I will not be asking businesses to support it one way or the other, but what I will be doing is we have an opportunity through the Chamber of Commerce now that they have resumed their meetings to go again and do presentations there. Also, all of the different community groups that are part of Serve LaSalle, I think is an opportunity there as well to inform everybody about the city's position, and then hopefully be invited to their individual organizational meetings and then be able to provide that information again firsthand. So whereas I think we are limited due to our ability to hold, some meetings in parks for a little while, I do think that given the technology that we have right now and the fact that everyone's used to it, being able to get an invite to a meeting to be able to give a 10-15 minute presentation is it's not as hard as it used to be, and the attendance is probably going to be fairly good as well.
Well, are we as elected officials allowed to go to businesses and ask for support?
So I'm going to allow Michael and Winnie to answer that question, but my rule of thumb is largely I do not control you guys at all, nor would I try.
Will it put me in an orange jumpsuit? That's all I care about.
Yep, the prohibitions and what the staff has to be very careful with if the measure is put out to the voters is obviously, and Chen's mentioned this, the staff can't be put in a position of expending public funds to advocate for one result or the other with a qualified ballot measure or sales tax measure. But electeds as public officials, you are free to take positions one way or the other as you see fit and to garner support on either side of a measure as you see fit.
Okay, so I just don't want to depend simply on the chamber. For one, not every business is a chamber member, and two, if they are members, not all of them are active in it. So I don't want to solely depend, well, we hit the business community because we hit the chamber up. I just want to make sure that we've got our marching orders or create our marching orders of what we can do as individuals.
Of course. So one of the things that we do have that Wendy has put together is kind of the rules of engagement for employees. We will obviously do the same for elected officials with regards to this so that everybody has it. And then also along those lines, I outreach to our businesses outside of our chamber is something that I definitely see us doing. We have the capability to do those things. Now, obviously, whether or not our business owners or our voters here is one question, but making sure that the information is out there is important, and probably more important once we receive our if the council chooses to move forward, once we receive our designation as to what exactly the ballot letters are going to be.
And I understand they're not voters, but something about, having Joe at Brew Kitchen support this speaks volumes to the locals that do go and eat at his place and have credibility with him. So as long as we understand the rules, I'm good.
Completely agree. With that, next slide. So council, at this point, obviously you've had an opportunity to kind of see the genesis, the history of how we have arrived at this point. Obviously a reworking of some of the ballot question and title in order to be more in line with the general council thinking. If you have any other questions for me or for the rest of the staff, we're happy to answer them at this point.
So can we make a motion to adopt the resolution in item 11A, is it? Yeah. Is that our next step if that's what we want to do?
If I could, I think the motion would be to move staff's recommendation because there are a number of resolutions up for approval. There is an ordinance as well. So if that's the motion, I would also ask for the opportunity to read the title of the ordinance into the record.
Okay, so I'll make the motion to approve staff recommendations 1 through 5.
Second.
Thank you, Tony.
I have a motion by Councilmember Hasselbrink, seconded by Councilmember Dovey. Mr. City Attorney, would you like to read the title?
Yes, thank you. Before the City Council for consideration this evening is ordinance number 2020-06 entitled an ordinance of the City of Los Alamitos, California, adding Chapter 3.14 to Title 3 of the Los Alamitos Municipal Code, imposing a transactions and use tax to be administered by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration.
Roll call. Mayor Murphy?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Turco?
Aye.
Councilmember Doby?
Aye.
Councilmember Gross?
I'll vote aye, but I want it clear that I'm doing so for the purpose of allowing the voters to make a decision on this.
Noted. Councilmember Hasselbrink?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 11B, consideration of the process for City Council submission of a ballot argument in favor of a proposed 1 1/2 cent sales tax, transactions and use commission. Yeah?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the approval of putting the item before the voters for the November 3rd election, the council can choose to submit a ballot argument in favor of the measure itself. This can be done through a number of different ways. Individual council member could write the argument for. A subcommittee of the council could work together to write the argument for, or the council could assign council members to work on a ballot argument and then bring that ballot argument back to the entire city council for approval by each of the members. What we are asking for in this particular instance is a preference from the council with regards to how to move forward, and then if necessary for the staff to schedule an item for consideration at your next council meeting. And with that, I will also ask Michael or Wendy if they have additional items that they would like to add to that explanation.
That sufficiently sets the stage for my perspective, but I'd be happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Okay, any comments or questions? Hearing none, I'm going to make a motion to submit the balance argument signed by all 5 council members.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
I can get some clarification. Are you appointing 2 council members to draft the argument? Or are you requesting staff to schedule a discussion for the council to draft it together in an open meeting?
Good question.
Two that said designate 2 council members to draft the argument for the signature of all 5 council members. Correct, Richard?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a motion by Mayor Murphy, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Turco, to designate 2 council members to draft an argument for consideration and signature by all 5 council members. Would you like to designate the council members now or make that a separate motion?
Let's designate them now. Anybody want to volunteer first of all?
I'll work on it.
The attorney should do it.
Who?
I think our attorney Turco should do it.
Technically, I'm not your attorney. That's Michael.
Would the budget standing committee like to do it and complete the process?
Sure.
I love working with Truco. He doesn't charge me $350 an hour.
Okay.
Michael's more reasonable than that, Shelley.
Do you need to vote on this?
Yes.
Oh, I see the roll call. Sorry, if I turn the page. Okay. You want to clarify one more time, Wendy, what we're voting on?
Yes, we are going with alternative number 2, designating Mayor Pro Tem Turco and Councilmember Hasselbrink to draft an argument for consideration and signature by all 5 council members, and direct that item be placed on the July 27th adjourned regular meeting agenda. And I have a motion by Mayor Murphy, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Churchill.
Question?